responsible for evaluating who is a big thing. This isn't my first rodeo either. While you guys were going through No Child Left Behind all those years, nothing was ever documented and put on so people could actually see what I'm just talking about. So I think this is phenomenal, whether you like it or don't like it. I think short term it's going to hurt kids because it's going to take teachers out of the classroom. And it's not in the best interest short term of kids, but I do agree in the long term I think it will be. So I think this is an incredible amount of information that's gotten put together in a short period of time. And I thank everyone that worked on this for that. But I just want to clarify, from my understanding, if these 2 additional positions are not added, then the elementary administrators will be responsible for evaluating double.
27 to 39, depending on how many specialized programs they have in their school.
But it'll be double than what the secondary.
Yes, actually it will.
So,
Yes, it will.
yeah, I'm just looking at it kind
That's
of
correct.
from a grievance standpoint.
Yep.
But secondly, when will the teachers do their portion of the evaluation? Will that be something that's had to be paid through a stipend? Would it be done on their planning period? When will they be doing?
We always did, when I was in the classroom, we always did it when we crammed it into when we had to do it. Teachers become very creative with using their time. I know I did an awful lot of my reflections and goal writing and all that at home. You know, I mean, there's only so much time in the day, 6.5 hours of it, you're with your students, and you know, your prep time is a half an hour, which is usually parent calls or some child with a crisis or something you have to do, so a lot of times that's before and after school. It's just part of what we do.
Do we have any idea of an estimate of time this will take the teachers to do their portion of the
We
evaluation?
could probably figure that out. If we applied a lot of the same formulas, we could,
Right.
you know, look at it from that end. I mean, if that's something that information you'd be interested in.
I think it'd be helpful just to get basically a whole picture of how much time the district is going to lose being directly in front of students due to this evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, you don't, I mean, to speak to that as a teacher, you don't really lose time in front of the students, because the students are there, you gotta be there. I mean, you know what I mean? So it's not like a zero-sum game necessarily, where, you know, if I have to write up all of this stuff for my reflection, and my kids are there ready to go, I'm in the classroom with them, I have to find other time to do that. But I understand what you're saying. I think it would be a good exercise if we did see how much teacher time's put into it.
One of the things that
definitely.
teachers are now responsible for their own professional development, but through presenting information, say about standards, the Common Core, or presenting about curriculum. We are looking to do that during planning time during the school day and work with teachers then, so then we're also meeting the requirements of the evaluation, that what are you doing to improve your professional knowledge on a specific topic. So it's, there'll be a closer link between professional support for a teacher and what's going on in the classroom, and the needs of their student, which then can be evaluated.
Well, right, because one of the goals is a professional growth goal, so, you know, that would be part of it.
My observation is that this is really just one more step in our society becoming a totalitarian society. Little input, what local boards of education were all about was the state delegating each local community a certain amount of autonomy, and this is just one step in probably in the near future the state actually taking over all the school districts, and there'll be very little for local school boards to do at the table, because it's all going to be mandated by this totalitarian philosophy at the state level. When does this sunset? So you have a 20-year teacher, and you're gonna spend all of this time this year, 10, 15 hours, or whatever it is, with this one teacher. And he gets the evaluation done this year, and you say proficient is good.
Right.
Yep.
Why do you need to do it next year for that same teacher?
Well, that was our old system where it cycled through. So
Right.
every 3 years, you did see that teacher again, and you obviously reflected with that teacher during the year. Sorry, I want to get
But
back.
what are we gonna do next year with
Same
that?
thing.
Same thing.
Do it over again.
Every
And the year
Repeat.
after.
Every year.
Wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
Unless
same
they
thing.
tell
I
us
mean,
otherwise.
because the
So,
state says,
so are we gonna then somehow evaluate the evaluation of the first year? Because what changed with that person, the second, third, fourth, fifth?
I can't say. I'm
Just creation of paperwork and data that government is gonna have on a whole group of people.
Correct.
Teachers, their lives,
Correct.
everything about it. It's so wrong as far as this country is concerned.
correct.
It's really disturbing.
Okay, last comment goes to Paul.
What Andrew's saying is absolutely right. In the private sector, if you have a high-performing person in your organization, you don't spend, you spend a fraction of the time evaluating them the next year and the year after that, you know. To me, this is absolutely absurd, that you get somebody, high-performing people, and you have to go through the same thing again. So my question, once again, goes to what you brought up originally, seeing the absurdity of that and the absolute bad management of a problem that this represents. Did anybody in this administration push back on the state rep? Did anybody offer any insight and say, you know, we could achieve better results for less time, less money, and take some of that money that we would save on having to hire additional staff to do this, to hire actual teachers?
I would agree. I would just comment, up until July 1st, I was very involved with TEA and CEA. And I was on a commission with CEA, the Connecticut Educators Association. CEA was very involved in this. They put out a very intense lobbying effort when this bill was working its way through, the legislature. They fought it very hard. I know that Lynette Branham, who's one of the officers for CEA, was very involved in working with Stefan Pryor and the State Department of Ed, fighting, the good fight about this. Ultimately, the state decided that this was the best way to go, and that was the end of the story. I know CEA is still involved. I know Lynette meets with the Department of Ed at least weekly to go through a lot of this, because as we had alluded to, changes were still coming down the pike into July. I got a call, because I've been on the phone with the state almost weekly about this. I got a call at the beginning of August that said, we're sending a newsletter out to all of the TVAL administrators for the various districts, and we finally decided on the rubric we're going to use. So, it's been this constant change. But I know CEA in particular was very involved in fighting against this and arguing against it, and trying to come up with a better system. So.
Right, but I mean, did anybody from this administration, since you're on weekly calls, did anybody say at the appropriate level, there's a better way of doing this? Teacher gets an exemplary the next year, we spend half as much time evaluating them. Yes, so that was.
Yes, and through our professional
I'm saying
organizations.
that this administration, sure, coming up from principals and superintendents, I think it carries a lot more power than a professional organization. Everybody, that's always has.
The professional organization was statewide superintendents, and that we worked together in charting, we gave lists, we wrote everything, we gave testimony.
So the state entertained the motion of doing that. They entertained the idea of doing scalable
I
evaluation.
don't know if they entertained it. I mean, they sat in hearings and listened to what we had to say. I mean,
See, this is the frustration of being a board member, because
Right.
then it falls back to, well, okay, so now we gotta hire 2 administrators and pay the other $250,000 in those fees. And we've got a young lady coming up here, a student begging, practically crying for us to help her get Latin back in our schools. And these are the dilemma we face, and I just wish there was more fight on behalf of the school district at the appropriate in the appropriate places at the appropriate time, so that the state felt the frustration that we as board members, at least this board member feels.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is the administration organizational chart for Torrington Public Schools is revised to the way the Personnel Committee wanted to see it, differing a little bit from the one that was submitted last meeting. It added a little more detail.
Were the CIATs on this?
No. This was just an overview to show what administrators were in a building and what buildings were covered, and the general line chart to show the hierarchy. The actual breakdown was given in an Excel sheet that showed all staff. At a previous meeting, that's being updated to include the new staff that was taken care of over the summer. This chart simply shows the fact that THS, which up until 2 years ago, which only had 3 building administrators, now has 4 building administrators. TMS, which up until last year, when we added another assistant principal, still has 3 administrators at that building. Plus now you have the director of secondary ed overseeing both buildings, meaning that you now have 8 administrators overseeing your secondary education. It also shows you the fact that your elementary schools are listed with their principals showing the line up to the superintendent's office, which shows the line of hierarchy to the Board of Education, and the line below her going to the central office.
I get that. I would love to know who the direct report, CIATs report directly to whom?
The superintendent.
They report directly to
The superintendent, yes.
I thought they reported to, in the previous one, didn't they report to like the secondary and elementary principals?
No,
The
they,
director of secondary ed, didn't the CIAT report to them? This one I saw a diagram.
Originally, yes, but when we
Right.
started doing the numbers, we had to shift them.
When was
And they
that?
report to me
When was that?
when we were trying to figure out all the numbers for supervision,
So within the last couple of days, last week?
you know, within the last week.
You say that we now have,
Hang on. Question over here, please.
Can I just ask that on this sheet, the assistant principals be changed from associate directors back to assistant principals? Or to administrators? No, assistant principals. And then it says that Bogle Wetmore has an assistant principal. Is that new, or is that gonna be a shared position between? for the
that's
evaluation?
supposed to be part of the shared position for the new system, for evaluation purposes.
So that's not another position?
That's not another position.
Is there a way that could be delineated on there under Bogle, Wetmore, and Torrington instead of saying assistant principal, they say shared
Shared.
assistant principal? So that it's
I've asked for a larger version to be created for 1117 as well. That gives a better breakdown per building, which you'll see in probably about 2 months. So you'll actually know how many staff are in the building, teachers, parents, nurses, custodial, cafeteria.
sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt. But you say the high school has 4 administrators versus
Correct.
3 now.
No, they have 4 now,
Versus 3.
which was in 2010, 2011 school years. We had 3. We had a principal and 2 assistants.
Right.
Then last year, we added another assistant principal, making it 4, including the principal and 3 assistant principals. So
Okay.
this year's administration has 4 assistant principals at the high school,
So-
1 per grade level.
So you're saying it's the same 4,
Same.
except that now you have the CIAT positions.
Which are, they're out of central office.
No.
They're,
Well, they're located in the
In the
buildings,
building.
physically in the buildings, but they're evaluated by the superintendent.
I thought the CIAT people were in the administrative bargaining unit,
They are.
so they're not central office administrative. See, we go back to all this.
Andrew, I believe, allow me to clarify. What you're thinking is not what this chart should show. This chart shows the hierarchy. So the 4 assistant principals at the high school and the 3 assistant principals at the middle school report to the director of secondary education.
Right.
The CIATs do not report to the director of secondary education. They report directly to the superintendent.
And
This is the building-based administration. This isn't administers totally throughout the building. I didn't have special ed included, that's part of central office. Again, you'll have an expanded sheet coming in about 2 months, but I didn't want to overwhelm everybody with so much data at one time.
I find that what you're saying is incorrect on the CIAT, because if they're in the bargaining group, they're in the bargaining group.
No one's arguing.
Right.
They're not saying that they're central office administrators, they're saying they report to the superintendent.
Right.
They're still in the bargaining unit.
And all I'm trying to say is that we really added, if you want to split them in half, I guess, one that goes with the high school, which would add that, which would increase that to 5, and one that would go to the middle school, which would increase that from 3 to 4. It's
Yeah,
just
one to the
technicalities that, you know, I would like, as we as a board and as the administration talks, be more precise in the terminology, but not just the terminology, that there's legal significance to how these people are defined.
There's also administrative consequences for the Board of Education. There's knowing who reports to who has district-wide responsibilities and can speak on behalf of the district. These are huge issues, and they were raised at the last school improvement committee, which we may be hearing more of soon.
And it also goes to the issue of the administrator's contract, which in the section relating to vacancies and new positions, that contract specifically states that that has to be done at the board level, not by the superintendent unilaterally. That's my interpretation of reading it. Do you have your administrator's contract?
Mr. Chair,
Are you
this
asking me now?
organization chart is the current topic of discussion.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Well, what is your question, Andrew?
Well, it's not really a question, it's a statement, which is, we keep having these rollouts of.
This is something that came out of the Personnel Committee, requested by the Personnel Committee sub-chair to have this formatted in this fashion and given to the board. This was not at the discretion of administration, that was not at the discretion of board leadership. This came from the subcommittee per the request of exactly what they wanted to see. So this is not necessarily a conclusive document. This is a document based on a hierarchy that Dan was trying to establish of where building level administrators report, if I understand it correctly.
Correct. Yeah, so if I'm in 6th grade, I know I've got an 8th assistant principal, and that assistant principal reports to the director of secondary ed. From the director of secondary ed, they report to the superintendent. From the superintendent, they report to the Board of Education.
Right, and the next page in the
Gives the
list is
breakdown.
the breakdown of the names of the people in each of those positions.
Along with the extension numbers.
Yes. Moving on to, we're down to J now, student academic achievement results.
In your last packet, I shared with you the results of CMTs and gave you a simple guide as just how to look at it. This will be the last year that we will be administering CMTs, except for the MOS and the checklist. But in looking at I'll repeat it as it from years past. You need to look, when they talk about, when they look year after year after year for 3rd grade, how did they do? you're talking about different students or a different cohort. So if you wanted to know how our students progressed over time, you need to take a diagonal look. So you'd start with the 3rd grade, and then you could look down, you'd go over one, down one, and you'll find out how the same group of students did in 4th grade, and then go down and over and how they did in 5th grade. If you want to see the same children and how they performed year after year. But I want you to keep in mind that the test format is the same, but the test examples are not the same year to year. So that the 3rd graders in 2009 did not have a different test than those in 10, and those in 11, and those in 12. But again, it's the way they score them. Correct answers, incorrect answers. So if you want to know how a cohort did, go on the diagonal. If you want to know from year to year, go across.
Discussion. Legislation enacted Connecticut General Assembly 2013.
This is what we received from the Commissioner of Education, Stephanie Pryor, and it just gives a list of all new public acts impacting education. I can go through and highlight the ones that have greatest impact for us. But as you can see, there's quite a few of them. And with it comes committee work, comes action to be taken in the schools right now. We're working with Mr. Becerra. We've done a major review of all our schools for safety, what we need to have in place to make them safer. And I'm talking strictly about the physical plant. We also have to study carefully school climate, children being bullied, children being harassed, what happens outside of school, even if it isn't at a school event during the school day or when school is in session, but instances of bullying, harassment. We have all training now with in mental health of children and what type of programs the school can offer to help children learn how to cope. You're supposed to have a paraprofessional advisory council to which we send paraprofessionals from our district to participate. There's new standards for hiring an athletic director. There's an act on how the responsibilities of public educators as mandated reporters of child abuse. That's always been, we've always been mandated reporters, but now if we fail to do it, it could be, you too could be arrested or penalized. Community schools, which I spoke about, and that's how we engage families. And also what other services that you can offer through your school besides just your traditional school day. And it goes on and on. I mean, you can read these at your leisure. I have to go and I have to make sure what it means for our school district. Child obesity, physical exercise in schools. And
I'm attending tomorrow a legislative update from Shipman, so a two-hour session, so that may be helpful as well in putting some of this in perspective.
Vincent.
Are we in compliance with the hiring standards for our athletic director?
To this point, yes. This is.
Is this just because it was grandfathered in, or did we take that into consideration before?
No, I just got this like 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
so.
okay. Well, I probably should. I have other questions about it too.
Yeah, I was concerned with the safety component. and committees that have to be established and reports they have to do.
The roof pitch too, that was another one that I looked
Yes,
at.
yes,
We took that into account when we were doing the roofing project that fall.
Okay. pitch.
but it came in after we started, and so we did have to send some materials back so that we have the right pitch.
Excellent. And then one other thing I was gonna point out too was the childhood obesity legislation,
Yes.
sections 2 and 3. I'll just point out that the wellness committee had addressed that in their policy presented to the policy committee that was presented to the board. Just point that out.
Thank you.
Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, school governance position statement. That's yours.
Yes, I just wanted to share this. This is a piece that comes from CABE, Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, and CAPS, which is the Connecticut Association of School Superintendents. And it just makes it very simple. When they talk about the school governance, and it was written in March 2004, and they are updating it this year. They haven't completed it, but one organization represents all boards of education, and the other all superintendents, but they've been working together to, take this, put it in a simple form, but it just really shows Board of Education responsibilities and Superintendent of Schools responsibilities, and then joint responsibilities. And this was just an FYI I wanted to share with the board.
I'll deal with
You don't have
the good of the order.
Okay. All right, process for Connecticut superintendent evaluations.
Just working, Dan, I don't know if you want to say this.
The superintendent and I have been working on a format for her evaluation, which we'll have to schedule a meeting to sit down and actually do. Basically, according to process, we should do our board evaluation before technically doing her evaluation. So these are some generalized worksheets that we have come up with to take a look at, see if we wish to customize or use the standardized templates for them, as well as sitting down and during her evaluation, which will be basically an oral presentation, we will each be given a series of sheets to determine what we think of the evaluation in the course of the process, and add comments to it, after which we will combine together all 10 scores to see what the total evaluation score is, creating a centralized score. It seemed like the most logical way to proceed forward. And hopefully at some point, as each evaluation of the superintendent is done individually by year, what my hope would be is that at some point we can create a standardized format that we'll use going forward for all superintendents.
You want to know that the state is designing one to go along with the teacher and administrator exam.
As long as somebody else has to click the buttons, I'm good with that. Data entry is not my thing. I'll set the hardware up, no problem.
When did Superintendent Clapper, when did you formally take over the reins of superintendent in this district?
July 1, 2012.
Wow.
2012.
I was acting superintendent.
August.
So to date, this board has not had an annual formal evaluation. When's the last time we had an annual?
Chris Leo
Chris Leon?
was the last evaluation
Right.
that we did.
Right.
And the last time the board evaluated
So
itself
that was
was
actually 3 superintendents ago, if you count the interims? Is that right?
Yes.
3 superintendents ago. So we haven't had a board evaluation of a superintendent.
for ourselves.
Right. We haven't had evaluated ourselves in the same period of time. Is that
Correct. Correct. We have not evaluated ourselves either.
Right. So we're technically way out of compliance with the school governance position statement, correct? I mean, it's pretty black and white. We're way out of compliance. Connecticut School Law by Thomas Looney says, Connecticut Statute 10157. This statute requires that the Board of Education evaluate the superintendent at least annually. This provision is the only responsibility the Board of Education has for the direct evaluation of personnel. So even out of compliance with the state for 3 years, is that a fair statement? I mean, the law is the law.
Chris Leone left.
Did you evaluate acting superintendent?
I was gonna say, I didn't know that evaluation for an acting
Yeah,
superintendent.
I'm not sure.
No.
I don't think you evaluate that.
So we're not out of compliance because we did Mr. Leone.
She
Well,
finished
by
her
some
first
law,
year.
But we haven't done her in the past.
So what's the repercussions of not, so we have not followed the law for July 1, 2012 to July 1, 2013, right? I mean, that period is coming
Well,
and going.
that's the
That's the-
first year.
that's the evaluation.
That was the first year for the
Evaluation.
evaluation, which we were supposed to get that done by
Hopefully,
July.
well, we were supposed to do it after July 1, because she completed her first year.
Okay.
So now, after July 1, during the summer, hopefully, we were supposed to do that.
Is there a time parameter for?
There's, go ahead, Fiona,
Yeah,
sorry.
this is what you're
Yes.
proposing to be determined.
That would be my recommendation for it.
Is there a legal time requirement, something set by statute, or?
That is correct.
I don't know.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay,
I don't
so I
know.
mean,
Again, that's why I was trying to create a
no
standardized
penalty
format.
if you don't get it done in the first 3 months of the new year.
Not that I'm aware of. I didn't ask.
It's kind of an interesting concept, because if you have to do it after the beginning of the next year, and say the superintendent obviously leaves at the end of, just in hypothetical in this situation, would have left June 30th, 2013. Once the superintendent is gone, then does he or she still required, are we still required to put in an evaluation for
I
that
think we're
person?
supposed to do a post-evaluation.
Are we?
I believe, yes. But what we have to do before we can do that is this board still has not set its goals. We're going to have to set a meeting to finish our board goals because we can't close out our assessment of ourselves without having our goal. We started it and it was a very long, non-productive meeting. We're going to have to do that in the next couple of weeks so that we can get back on the schedule of getting an evaluation.
I just want to make sure that we're not, like, there's some time limit that the state statute says, have it done by August 1st, or,
I haven't seen it.
okay. As long as we're acting in good faith. That's the standard, I guess.
Okay. Letter N, censure of a board member, censure of a Board of Education member. I was asked 3 weeks ago by a few board members to find out what the protocol would be for censure of a board member. I inquired with Shipman and Goodwin and asked them for a written legal opinion that was asked of me. And we have included in the board packet the response from Shipman and Goodwin of what the process would be if someone were to want to censure a board member. And the only reason they're using the term censure is because if you read through the statute, there's really, in Robert's rules, section 61, it says that you can reprimand, fine, suspend, or expulsion or censure of a board member. But under Connecticut state law, you cannot suspend or expel, and you cannot fine if it's not previously identified in your bylaws, which was not identified in our bylaws. So under this section 61, it only leaves you with one option, which would be the discussion, the removal of that person until such time that order is restored and an investigation can be completed and the person is put back in good standing. So it's essentially telling you that other than, respectfully asking someone to stop, the there's really not a lot. It's pretty much what the statute says when you get to the Connecticut law.
Mr. Chair, I'm curious, can you identify who the 3 board members were?
That asked for it?
Yeah.
I was asked by Fiona,
Yep.
Ellen,
Yep.
and myself.
All right.
When they asked, I said, that's a pretty good idea. Just know why
Okay.
or how we go through this process.
Fair enough. So, board leadership.
Well, no, I asked for it
Fiona,
specifically
Ellen,
because
and Ken.
we asked for the ruling.
Correct.
Because we've received a lot of complaints from other members about the meetings being out of hand and wanting to know what we could do. So rather than debate this and have other members saying we're trying to violate our rights, we thought we would get an opinion. Now we all know there's nothing anyone can do.
No, I believe what you can do is at the time it's happening, you can have that person,
Yes.
the board can go and have that person remove from the meeting.
Right,
Is it
until such
majority
time
vote?
that
I
that
assume it's a
person.
majority vote?
Actually, yes, it says a majority vote. Page 2. Page 3, I'm sorry.
Such motion is done.
So this was, again, I was similar to the request for the consent agenda. This was just, I was asked for the request. This is the procedure. You know, it really, it doesn't have a lot of teeth because, you know, you're elected officials. You can't be thrown out, you can't be expelled, you can't be suspended, you can't, you know, it's just, and it also clearly states in here that it has to be done at the time of the infraction. It can't be something brought up months later, weeks later, you know, it has to be an immediate reaction, not a, you know, let it stew for a couple of meetings and then say, you know, back in May, I was upset about, you know, it has to be an immediate reaction. And it also states that if a board member is disruptive, that it is the board chair's responsibility to warn that member, and after 3 warnings, then that member can be, there can be a vote by the remaining board to ask that member to leave. That's the whole that can happen. But it has to be 3 warnings in the same meeting. It can't be you got 2 in May and 1 in July, so you're out. It has to be during the meeting that's going on.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do certain board members who are concerned about this have certain examples they'd like to bring forward?
Point of
I
order.
would love to know. Well,
Point of, I don't think
It's on the
that's
agenda.
appropriate conversation. I think that is the ruling.
yeah.
If anyone in the future has an issue, any of these people has an issue going forward,
Mhm.
they're to call it at the time.
Right. but how's the board
Now we
make-
know what
well,
everyone's
but
supposed
what I'm
to
saying
do.
is, what are the ground rules between censuring a board member because you disagree with that person intensely and muzzling that person because they disagree with you intensely? Where's that?
It would have to be disruptive. I mean, it's pretty clear in here. It has nothing to do with political opinion, has nothing to do with philosophical opinion. It just has to do, if you were in a process of speaking, and I'm gonna pick on Dan because he's sitting next to me. Sorry, Dan.
It's okay.
And
I'm used to it.
you know, you're in the process of making a point, and Dan yells over you, or gets upset, or, you know, or does something to disrupt when you have the floor. I have to warn Mr. Tebow and say, I'm sorry, Mr. Tebow, Mr. Cavanero has the floor, you need to hold until it's your turn. And then if Mr. Nargi were to start agreeing or talking in contradictory to what you were saying, and Mr. Tebow got in again, I would have to warn Mr. Tebow the second time and say, you can't continue to be disruptive, you have to. No, it's not a political thing, it's just, you know, not following the process.
All right, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Because at this meeting,
No. You're actually always guests, you're never answering
oh,
questions.
so you can ask us.
We can always answer. Just say no. At the last meeting, it was requested by Mr. Nargi that the Board of Education take up the matter in discussion of does the Board of Education want to seek a superintendent annually? In other words, not have a contract beyond 1 year and go out for applications on an annual basis for the superintendent. Is that correct?
I was more concerned that, obviously, if we were to give annual 1-year contracts, then obviously I would want to do that. But traditionally, the board, especially in the first hire, usually give 2 or 3 year contracts. We almost always give 3-year contracts. I'm just, my concern was more that as any superintendent finishes whatever that contractual term, be it 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, that we would start the process like we do when we don't have a superintendent, which is to open up a 2 in September, so by January, we would have in place for a contractual period going further, either the existing superintendent or a new superintendent. I think it's an important process.
Well, we are required, again, going to Mr. Mooney's book, under education law, you are required to notify, it's 12 months in advance, correct? A superintendent that you are not, that you are going out to seek another superintendent. That you are going to open it up, so to speak, for bid, or you're going to say, we're going out to see what the market is. And you have to do that 1 year in advance of the termination of their contract. So you would have to, if you did a 2-year contract, at the end of the first year, you would have to tell the sitting superintendent that we are not going to renew you. We are going to go out and seek additional applicants. And at that point, you're more than welcome to apply, but we want to go out and seek additional applicants.
So who advised us that we missed our date? Or didn't miss our date? We missed the date is what you're saying.
Well, no, we're not saying, you asked for a discussion among the board, for the board to take into consideration going out, you actually said annually, but
right.
For a superintendent, to do a search every year to make sure we have the best and the brightest.
Right.
So if you did an annual, you would have to do 1-year contracts with a non-renew, and that each year the superintendent would have to reapply for their job.
But under what you just stated, which was Connecticut state statute, that you have to notice the superintendent 1 year ahead of time.
Right, when you sign their contract on July 1st for 1 year, you tell them this is a non-renewable contract. You do not have, we're notifying you right now that this is a 1-year contract and that we are going to seek new candidates. You're more than welcome to reapply for the job, but we're going to reopen this every year.
So how does that affect her renewal coming forward?
You could, next July, you could let, or June, you could let the sitting superintendent know that you're not going to renew the sitting superintendent. And you could go through interviews the following year.
So what you're saying is we're locked in now to at least a 1-year contract.
You're locked into a year and 10 months.
Well, I mean, we're not locked in until we sign a contract. She may not, hypothetically, but I'm saying.
Well, we do have an existing contract.
Right, which expires on June 30th.
Mm-hmm.
And you're 14th. And now you're saying that because
We actually
we
automatically
did not
renew.
know what we were doing, and as a board, or human resource person, who should have told us this? You know, before.
It's not
July
common
1st.
practice for a district to go out for open applications for a superintendent on an annual basis. It is practice for a district to have a superintendent and not extend the superintendent's contract, but it is not normal for a district to say that we're going to go out every year.
But what you're saying is we are mandated now by state law to give her at least 1 year extension.
Yes.
So we lost our power as a board to do the one thing that we actually have power to do, which is to voluntarily, freely choose who we want to be our superintendent.
For 1
Shameful.
year.
That's
For 1 year.
Yeah, it's shameful.
Does the board wish to move in a direction of seeking a superintendent on an annual basis? Or
It's like the managers in baseball, managers that are on the one-year contract traditionally don't perform better. The ones who are kind of locked in and have the ability to build it do.
You mean like Walter Alston had 26 one-year contracts? That worked pretty good.
it's a good baseball staff.
I like Walter. I mean, obviously, I'm an advocate that you get evaluated, you don't get the job done in the period in which your contract's due. We look for someone else. It's hard to do in 1 year. I wasn't really advocating the 1-year concept.
Okay.
But,
I may have misheard you, I wrote down.
no, I
annual,
mean,
you
I
said
probably,
annually,
yeah, I don't really, I mean, if it's the practicality of doing the 1 year, I guess, though, is,
It costs about 35 grand to do the search.
well, it shouldn't cost that much.
Well, that's just the average.
Why is
That's
that?
what it-
That's on the low side.
that-
Well,
that's
we
just
were
the-
doing them for 10 and 15, and we,
When we were a member of CABE, we're not. So we would have to buy the consultant, hire the consultant, and then pull a candidate.
that's a law that you have to have a consultant.
It's not law, no, but
So, I mean,
it's
we
strongly
couldn't just,
advised.
we couldn't, yeah, because it's been so successful in this district.
Mr. Rivera?
I would think that if you want to do this, you have to have it evaluated, the individual, and in order to do that, we'd have to have done our goals. So I think that this is all very, we knew about that at the very least, so if we wanted to do that, then we should have been on the ball with the evaluations. I don't think that this is out of the blue, that we didn't know this.
Well, we did out of the blue that we didn't know it, right? That we were gonna be locked in. We didn't meet our.
the discussion until after evaluating the person. I mean, to me, if we haven't done the evaluation, that's, we're okay with how things are going. I mean, if there's,
And you know, I think you make a great point, which is if this board was acting more as an entity that it's supposed to be, i.e. overseeing the superintendent. I think if we set up, we've had more thought in the evaluation process and setting the goals that we want from the superintendent, we probably would be very successful in having a better relationship with the superintendent, and we could probably accomplish that on a year-to-year basis. So that superintendent, first year that superintendent comes in, we lay out how we want the superintendent to interact with the board, communication, what our goals are for that year, and if we can do an evaluation, we can have that evaluation process month to month, so that by the time 7-8 months into the year, we may have done 7 or 8 evaluations with the superintendent. It would be more proactive. It's more time consuming, but I think it's important to be more proactive in the oversight of the superintendent going forward.
We can't do that as a board because last year it took us till November for me to drag goals out of you guys. And here we are at the end of September and I still don't have goals from you guys. And you know, we're gonna do our second retreat meeting and I'm going into that second retreat meeting with the exact same limited number of goals that I had going into the first one that nobody wanted. So we're gonna go into a second one. You haven't submitted any. So how can you say we need to be more involved and more proactive when you as a member don't do your goals? I mean,
But we weren't really,
we're
the
not.
concept is now evolving that if we can tie the board goals more tightly with the superintendent's evaluation, I think the board members would be, all of us, or at least myself, would be more thought, would spend more thought into making sure that this process being that it will be interactive with the superintendent on a month-to-month basis. I think we all would have a lot more energy put into it.
Well, the evaluation is tied directly to the board goals. The evaluation of the superintendent is the evaluation of the superintendent to meet the board's goals.
And I'm saying that we do yearly evaluation. I mean, we do yearly board goals. But maybe what we really need to do is monthly board goals, so as to, on a monthly basis, tie what we expect to be seen with the superintendent, with the boards.
That was brought up at the retreat that we had, that we, I don't know if it was Mr. Brady, I think, brought that up, or somebody brought up the having a list of short-term goals and a list of long-term goals. Was that?
Yes.
Am I giving you credit correctly?
Okay.
And, but we still don't have any short-term or long-term goals. So we're gonna go into our second board retreat with the same 3 members. What's that?
Does that answer any questions as you put it as your name? I'm sorry.
Not really.
Can we just get off track?
Okay. But do we want to, does the board want to proceed with looking into replacing the superintendent name? Do a straw. John?
No.
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 Yes.
No.
Pete, following our turf committee, our turf field meeting we had here, I was contacted the next day. I sent an email to the mayor and to city council requesting a joint board meeting between the Board of Ed and city council so that the city council could explain to the board why the improvements of the fields is different from any other capital project that this board does, and why it wouldn't follow the same format of the board appoints a building committee, the board submits that building committee to city council either approves or changes that building committee, and then that building committee takes off with the design and the construction of that project, reporting back to the board, because we're ultimately responsible for the maintenance of the facility. I received a reply from the mayor who said, I think you're right, and I think that the Board of Education should appoint, or should recommend, I wouldn't say appoint, we should recommend a building committee to go to city council for their meeting next week, and then it will just follow the normal process of any other facility project that the district does. In trying to be as balanced as we could, knowing that it is a very hot topic, and there is a committee that has done a tremendous amount of work on this over the last 6 years. We put together a list of committee members that is it in here or not? No, it's not in here. The recommendation of the committee, oh, I'm sorry, was from the Board of Education to have Mr. Becerra, have Danielle or someone from the finance department. The mayor would like to have someone from the city's finance department on there, being Alice or one of the people that works for Alice, so that there's a connection for the money. From the turf committee, Paul Denza, and Scott Rosenbrand. From Torrington High School would be our director of secondary education and our athletic director. Both the athletic director and Mr. Becerra have been on this turf committee since, not quite its inception, but for quite a while. There would be one BOE member. I didn't put a name on it because I don't know when this project will actually take place and with elections coming up. It's not, I don't believe that the member should be just, okay, this person is on it, and then if you're not reelected, you stay on it. I think it should be a current sitting board member. Tim Waldron, because he is the liaison that they already have established between DEEP, the DEEP, and the city for this grant. And Jerry Roulette, the Director of Public Works for the city, because ultimately, as has been pointed out to us, that's the city property. And all permits and everything would have to go through his departments, subsequent departments. So that was a quick bunch of names that we put together. Don't know if anyone has any different recommendations, anything they'd like to change, add.
You know,
I just would like to see possibly someone from the high school or governance, some connection to parents, possibly parents of, kind of get a better feel for the school.
That's a very
Because
fair
it will be
assessment.
here.
Well, one of the reasons for selecting Scott Rosengrant, just for those that are or aren't familiar with it, is Scott Rosengrant, when this project started, he was the, I don't want to give him a title, but chairman, leader of youth soccer in Torrington. And he was, very involved in this, and they paid for half of the original feasibility study. So he's a member of the turf committee, but he's also a youth soccer representative, which is a big stakeholder in this project. So he was kind of a double, he covers kind of two hats. So, I mean, I think we could add a board of ed, a PTO member. If the board wants to add, or THS parent could be. That's it, all right with everybody?
yeah.
Whole lottery.
Well, I think it's just really important to get someone who is not just vying for the athletic portion, because it is gonna be at the high school, on the grounds, the other parents are gonna have to look at it if the kids don't play on it, so I think it's important to get that perspective, and I'm saying the PTO only because that's the parents would communicate with.
We can make someone from or nominated by the PTO, how's that? Because if they're
See
not a
who's
member, but the
interested.
PTO wants to put
Well,
somebody.
every parent is a member.
If you pay your dues.
No, they don't charge.
They don't charge?
The time parameters of going this direction now will be such to getting this up and running.
Well, they're really, as was explained to us, the grant is good for 5 years. They're gonna vote on Monday to receive the grant. So from that point, they have 5 years to use it, but they're allowed to file for an extension for up to another 5 years. So we don't know if there's enough money there yet to do the project, because the project has never really been designed. It was a broad feasibility study with just some construction means, average numbers assigned to it back in 2010. So based on today's current pricing, and we don't know. So it could turn out that they do an actual design, and they turn around and find out that it's gonna cost, and I'm just randomly picking a number. They find, I think the guy from Deep used $5 million. Then the city can hold on to the 2.7 until such time that we can come up with the money. So. Does anyone here have a gray Toyota Yaris in the parking lot?
Yeah.
Would you kindly go talk to Mr. Becerra, please? I have no idea why, I'm sorry. I hope it's still there. Is there anyone who had something that resembled a gray? So we don't really know when it's gonna happen, to answer your question. Yes, Mr. Kennedy.
If this is the end of that discussion, I would like to just make a couple comments since I was not at that meeting.
Yeah.
I understand my name was thrown into the ring there a couple times, or at least once regarding.
By me,
By you.
and I issued you an apology afterwards and everybody else because you had made a statement that if I wanted it in a formal motion, but you didn't actually make the motion.
Motion.
Correct.
Yeah, I will not present you for that, sir.
That's
What I will do, what I would like to say, go on the record, I would like to go on the record because I'm not sure what was said about me, or I didn't have time to look at the tape. First of all, within this whole discussion, there were two, I think, two very different sort of concerns that various board members expressed. I think it got rolled into one big concern, and then I think the whirlwind took off, and we got what we got apparently last week. Number one, and I'd like to just I'd like to just go on record, if anybody was recording this, of where I am on this, okay? For one thing, I've heard expressed the idea that the concern with this particular item is that why did Torrington get grant money for an athletic upgrade, and where other school districts got grants for computers and technology and more instruction-based funding. And I think that is a valid argument. I mean, I think it's a valid concern. I think it needs to be explored. I think the board should be made aware of how that comes about. That other school districts get the computers and the iPads and you know, we get athletic stuff. But that's separate from, and I think it needs to be explored. That's separate from the fact that the money is now there. And then I've got some specific concerns about that. And my concern was that the way this was presented, as I was informed, I think as other board members were informed, that the board knew nothing about this until very, very recently. And now this project is on the tracks, it's coming down, you know, high speed, and we have no time to really react to evaluate and react to it. I don't know why. I've gotten information since I first learned of this through Mr. Traub that seems to indicate that we had our facilities manager, I guess he's outside, he was aware of this for a long time now, right? I mean, from early on. So I think with the board, is owed an explanation for why he's an administrator, in a sense, he's an officer of the board, why he knew about this for so long, why that information didn't get up to the superintendent, and then that information get to the board. Isn't that a reasonable process to take? Number one, because if that had occurred in some reasonable fashion, I think an awful lot of the angst that went into the board's response to this would have been mitigated, number one. Number two, so I like that answered. Number two, I would just like to go on record again. When I think about what it will take to actually implement this, all I've seen so far are some schematics. $2.7 million initially sounds like a lot of money. To anybody who knows contractors and talks to them, it is not, okay? I would ask people, ask anybody who's listening here and wondering why the Board of Education is concerned, to come to the high school, drive up, and walk in through that front, you look at the paint job, you look at the cheap tin surfacing and facing of our portico, you look at the drainage, you wouldn't see this, but you look at the leak. My brother is an architect, a highly acclaimed architect who went through this building in its final phases. I took him up here on a Saturday to look at this thing, and before the Board of Education, I was chairman at the time, before we took this thing over, I had nothing to do with setting that up, by the way. It happened to be finished on my watch. He told me, he went boom, 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 all these things are gonna happen, all these things. And I would like the citizens of Torrington to know that the Board of Education is aware that $25 million, approximately 8-9 years ago, was allocated for that. That's a $25 million improvement to our school. So $2.7 million is bordering on, it's questionable whether they can actually do a quality job for that. So the Board of Education, I think, has absolutely the right, since this will live on Board of Education turf, whether the city owns it or not, it's our playing fields. The Board of Education has every right to ask, who's actually going to be building this? If people had been involved in who was building, who was contracted to revise and update and improve the high school for $25 million, I think there would have been major concerns. And we possibly would have gone with another firm other than some firm from New Jersey that had an office space somewhere in Waterbury, technically qualified. You know, what you get for $2.7 million depends on what sticks to whose pocket, and I think the board has the right to ask, who's going to be doing this? How comfortable are we with doing this? And what can we expect for $2.7 million? Are we going to be left with? You talk to any contractor, they'll tell you there's just so many different ways this thing could go bad, you know, and who's going to pay for that? So those are my concerns. I would like it answered why that, as a process piece, why it got so ugly because that information didn't come through the normal process of our facilities manager knew about it, was sitting on the turf committee, why it didn't just come through the administration like, hey, guys, this is on,
The one,
On the rails.
just to answer real quick from what, the information that we currently have. This group was formed under Susan O'Brien,
yeah,
and it sort of has existed as its own entity.
yep,
And when she was gone, they approached Chris on the top.
you know, got it,
And,
I get all that.
you know, there was a change in the track design, and then it was brought to, you know, to go to referendum, and it was not. Too expensive, we're not sending it. So
Okay.
it sort of died again.
Yeah,
But then there was the availability of some urban renewal grants
right,
that, that the state representatives were able to
Yeah.
get their name into, get Torrington's name into there.
got it,
And when they got the name in there, they needed a project that was up and, you know, at least conceptually ready.
understood,
So this project, because the state representative was very familiar with the project,
yeah,
threw that project in there, but where the disconnect happened is it's, they think that it's the people think it's a community project, which it's no doubt. I mean, it'll benefit the whole community, we're not arguing that. But it sits on property that the Torrington Board of Education is responsible to maintain.
I get
So
it.
that's where the disconnect was, is they were trying, this group thought that it was a community-based project and it could just be run through the city,
But none,
and that's
Mr.
what
Chair,
happened.
none of that
Mr. Chair.
matters to me.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make a motion to extend the meeting.
Yeah, no, thank you.
We actually only have to extend it beyond 11, I just read, that's what I was reading before. It says that the meeting should end by 10 o'clock, but it's only,
I brought this up before too.
I know, I just read it before to make sure I wasn't in violation of it, and it says, meeting should conclude by 10 PM. A majority vote of the board is required to extend the meeting beyond 11.